as the oncoming tracks rumbled through the ground. The small lip of the broken roadway, a fist-sized chunk hanging above the dirt wall of the foxhole, broke away and thumped her on the shoulder pad. Metal crunched and screeched on rockcrete as slab hulls bashed tank traps aside or dragged them across the paving. Beneath her, the dirt seemed to soften, shaken out of its hard, packed walls. One hand sank into the earth like it were flour. A heavy bolter hammered so close overhead that her helmet's audio bafflers clicked active, dampening it. Her chrono clicked midnight. The first day. They'd survived the first day. With a belching roar, the Chimera was above them, 38 tons of steel lurching forward and down on her as if it were a blockhouse ceiling caving in. She shoved her face into the dirt. Beside her, the veteran Ravel involuntarily whimpered, his hand gripping the tubes of the battle standard. Down the line, voices screamed in pain. Then the down angle of the Chimera's front track hit the back of the foxhole and caught, levering the rest of the machine's armoured bulk up onto the other side. Likely only a small bump inside the vehicle, but an instant of all-consuming terror in the confines of the foxhole. Helska ground her teeth. Would the foxhole be narrow enough? Would the Chimera be too heavily aft-loaded and topple backwards into the hole, crushing them? Her chest burned, her body forgetting to breathe. Then the belly of the vehicle slithered over them close enough to touch, and it was clear. When Helska finally drew in another breath, it was heavy with exhaust stink. She coughed, cleared her throat, and depressed the transmit rocker. Now! 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 They rose up without a shout. She'd insisted on that. Total surprise. No battle cries, no cheers. Let the weapons speak for you, she'd said. Helska hauled herself up by the crumbling lip of the foxhole, came to a crouch so only her tri-dome helmet would be visible. The first wave of chimeras had passed them. One had ploughed into an autocannon emplacement, its turret wickering fire at the fleeing heavy weapon team. Two more were repositioning to drop their ramps. Flares! Helska hissed into the Vox handset. Beyond the tanks, a soft pook, pook, pook sound echoed off the canyon walls. Down the line, one tank was frantically reversing, trying to back out of the foxhole it had plunged nose down in when the roadway collapsed. Across the roadway, she could see troopers levelling the long tubes she'd ordered placed at the bottom of the foxholes. Trooper Miklaj lifted his and set it down on the rock-creaked lip, flipped the blast shield out to cover the boxy tracker unit so the debris blowback of firing didn't scratch its lenses or foil the sensitive internals. Harsh sodium light bloomed in the air, starbursts of chemical burn washing the cleave wall to wall in contrasts of black and white. Fire! She said, drawing her sword and levelling it towards the enemy. There was no need for the order. They'd been instructed to shoot when the flares lit. Orange-white tongues of fire flicked out the back of the launchers. Half a breath later, the missiles jumped free of the tubes, fins snapping into place and secondary engines igniting to streak them towards the enemy transports. The distinctive whoosh of their passage through the air overlapped, much like the gauzy contrails of grey smoke that followed them, stitching a crosshatch pattern in the air. The first crack missile smashed high into a Chimera's side, boring deep between the upper hull and detonating just below the track guard. Sparks leapt skyward, throwing the guard spinning like an autumn leaf, while the severed tank tracks clattered to the ground. Another missile glanced off the top of a turret and spun away, bursting against the wall of the cleave in a cough of scattered masonry. Other shots she couldn't make out, but there was smoke on the roadway, and flame, and the confused lancing of panicked lasfire from the loopholes in the Chimera's sides. To her left, a turret fitted with a heavy flamer blurted burning promethium into the night, confused about where it had been hit from. Beside her, Miklaj had waited. The Chimera in front of them was lowering its ramp. Helska could see the black helmets of the Volskani revealing themselves as the hatch came down on its hydraulics. She gripped Miklaj's bicep below the launcher's shoulder rest. Fire! Fire! No! He shook her hand off, a stunning rebuke of authority. If someone had seen, she might have to punish him, but she was transfixed by the dropping ramp, the slow reveal of the Volskani with their gas-hooded faces. eye lenses shining in the flare light. Cadian-style flak armor defaced with symbols of chaos. Weapons. Miklaj stamped the firing stud and sent the missile barreling towards the opening hatch. It zipped in right above the lip and whammed into the chest of the lead Volskani, embedding in his ribcage and throwing him backwards, arms out. Then it blew. It had been a frag, not a crack. That's why he'd waited. Twists of shrapnel blew through the Chimera in a cloud of gore, plinking off the inside of the troop bay with a rattle like coins shaken in a can. Volskani screamed, rolled. Corporal Lek raised his grenade launcher and arced a frag in behind it, to catch anything that was still moving. 4 chimeras were still active, trying to maneuver around to engage their rear ambush. A chimera turret, afire from the glancing crack hit, traversed around towards them and unleashed a stream of las with a sound like a low note played on a bass viol. Helska ducked. It flashed past her and sketched a line of fire across the foxhole to her left, slicing through a trooper as he reloaded his missile launcher. "White shields!" she yelled into the Vox handpiece. "Now! Now!" They came from the bunker hatches in the walls, dashing out onto the roadway of the cleave, bent double to avoid fire. Gripping hand grenades and las rifles, one boy, no more than 16, holding his helmet on with one hand. It was a ruthless decision, ordering them to do this, but necessary. The regular troops were needed to hold the roadway. White Shield auxiliaries were good at this work, the kind that required enthusiasm and daring but not as much skill. Baratheus had wanted to put them in the forward defensive trenches to absorb fire, or stash them in bunker positions in the honeycomb walls. But this, letting them fall on the wounded tanks like scavengers, would give them more confidence. Yet she hated herself for it. A spray of heavy bolter traces tore into one squad, ripping 2 white shields apart and leaving another on the ground, frantically trying to pick himself up with an arm that was no longer there. Bright streams of multi-laser fire slit 2 cadets open like the passage of a razor. Then the white shields were on the tanks, firing las carbines and shoving grenades into viewing hatches. The stalled chimera, the one hit in the track, started dropping its ramp. A white shield named Kasla slammed herself against the side of the hull and blind-fired her las rifle into the crew bay on full auto, as her partner tossed a frag grenade in. He'd thrown the grenade too early after pulling the pin, but it didn't matter. It only gave the panicking enemy time to unlatch the big double doors at the top of the transport and start clambering out before the frag tore them to pieces. Through the smoke, Helska saw Cadet Lieutenant Xander and his mob scrambling up onto the flamer tank. 4 had been caught by the awful weapon as they came on and were rolling on the ground, their comrades futilely trying to beat out the chemically accelerated fire consuming them. A Volskani commander in a padded tanker helmet rose out of the turret hatch, bolt pistol in hand, but he hadn't realized how many conscripts were on his vehicle, or how close they were. Xander grabbed the crewman's wrist and forced the bolt pistol away, then jammed the muzzle of his las pistol just below the man's collarbone and fired twice. Xander and his squad mates dragged the body free, the commander's uniform glowing orange with embers where he had been shot, and dropped 2 grenades down the turret's cupola hatch. "Close it!" Xander said, his high voice raw in the smoke from the turret's still-dripping flamer. And Helska realized one of his forearms had been scorched from touching the hot metal. "Close the frickin' thing!" They tried to slam it shut, but hands shot upwards and pushed back, desperate. Helska could hear the banging of panicked enemy troopers inside the vehicle as they tried to batter down the rear and top hatches. They didn't realize the white shields were holding them shut. Xander threw himself chest first onto the hatch, pressing it down with his weight until nothing but pinched fingers emerged. Whoomp! A hollow, muffled sound. The banging stopped. White shields cheered and whooped. One stood on a burned-out hull and raised his lasgun high. "Major," said Udza, hand on a helmet's audio output unit. "We're reporting clear. Enemy tanks neutralized." But Helska could barely hear the Voxwoman above the drum of quad cannons. The Bastion defensive guns were active again, and as soon as she processed it, the searing lash crack of las gun fire joined it. That would be the troops in the forward trenches, hunkering down until now, engaging a new oncoming target. "The hells is that?" asked Legg. "That's what we knew would happen," Helska said, turning and peering past the fire at the forward trench line. Beyond it, and beyond the wrecked demolisher, she could see more armoured hulls in the darkness. This time, moving slow and steady, with infantry peering around from behind, disembarked and using them as cover. "Another wave. More careful this time. They've learned their lesson." "Unfurl the colours, sir?" asked Zarin Ravel. "Let them fly, Zarin," she said. "They know we're here now, so let the bastards know who's about to kill them." Ravel snapped the pole together with practiced hands and raised the standard. A plain battle standard with a sun in a starburst. Standard issue, not much inspiring, apart from the XXIV stitched on its reverse side. "24 in the war!" she shouted. "24 in the war!" the echo came. And they were. The question was, for how long? Phase 4. The Week of Blood. 1. Excerpted from Creed at Cadia, A Strategic Reassessment, by General Dabitha Ravi, Chief of Operations, Cadian 2nd Army Group. Unredacted edition, with 34 full-plate illustrations, held in the Inquisitorial Collection at the Fortress Library of Vespis. Historical treatments of the fall of Cadia, and most particularly Creed's role as commander, generally gloss over the 7-day period between the Black Legion's initial planetfall and their forces reaching the inner bastions of Kazakraf. The most popular versions of the narrative generally put the most focus on the first day of combat, the landings around the Elysian Fields, the breach of the Eastern Curtain Wall, the assault on the northern citadel defences, and the all-out attack on the Shrine of St. Maurican, to name a few theatres, then jump rather abruptly to later events. This is for a number of reasons, but two stand out above all others. First, given the number of battlefields and forces involved, it is difficult to establish a narrative through-line. The fighting itself was confused, with whole units unable to tell their part in it as a result of being wiped out. This is to a certain extent not the fault of historians, but of history itself as a discipline. War is an experience fraught with so much disorder that it is difficult to capture the scope of it in language. The historian's role is to communicate with clarity, and in an engagement like the 8-day struggle for Craft Plain, clarity is nearly impossible. The second reason, I believe, is a reluctance to engage with difficult questions about Lord Castellan Ozarka Creed and his weaknesses as a commander. Most histories of Cadia are written by Cadians, and given what was to ultimately happen, there is a fear among us of stepping on the old man's grave. But the truth is this: the Battle of Craft Plain must be included in any strategic assessment of Creed, since it was during this engagement that his weaknesses and limitations as a commander came most to the fore. And it was the period where he was most disliked and even reviled by those serving under him. Feelings that have shifted or been intentionally sanitized due to later events. Creed lost at Craft Plain, frequently in a decisive and ignominious fashion, and I witnessed this firsthand as a junior tactical officer at the Craft Command War Room. Perhaps it is best to put it plain and avoid accusations of concealing my bias. I did not like Ozarka E. Creed. I was not alone in this. Indeed, the Lord Castellan was often most popular among those who never met him in person. While serving at Creed's hollow table, I thought him boorish, a problematic drinker, often dismissive of subordinates' advice, and extremely reckless. At times, I suspected he was being handled by his, frankly sinister, adjutant, Colour Sergeant Kell, who loomed behind him like a shadow. I admit that for a time I personally blamed the Lord Castellan for the loss of our homeworld. It was only in a review of surviving documents that I developed a much deeper and more nuanced appreciation of the stresses and difficulties Creed was under during that crucial period. And while I do not believe Creed performed well over the course of those 8 crucial days, I am at a loss to name someone who might have performed better. Creed, I now realize, had been dealt a catastrophically bad hand. Forced into the position as Lord Castellan, Creed had never trained or been prepared for the many roles he took on. While a brilliant commander at the divisional level, he was now effectively the head of a crusade, in addition to being a wartime planetary governor. Never given time to fully set up a general staff, Creed found it nearly impossible to find senior officers he was confident delegating tasks to, fueling his instinct to take on everything himself. Moreover, the High Command cabinet representatives, elites who remained loyal to the murdered Porelska, treated the low-born Creed with hostility and suspicion. This led to him too often dismissing their advice and following his own instinct, as in the disastrous aerial engagement on the day of the landings. Moreover, he inherited a theatre of war where his favoured military tactics, aggressive manoeuvre warfare, and combined arms assaults were not an option. He did not know where the forces of chaos would land or in what strength, and he quickly discovered what every war master has learned before or since, that the allied forces of the Adeptus Astartes, Imperial Navy, and the Adeptus Sororitas are not so much a unified command structure, but a loose coalition. At the time, standing around the recaf pot at Craft Command, we junior tactical officers, every one of us in the folly of youth, thinking ourselves Macarius reborn, often asked why Creed did not simply order the Sororitas and Astartes to abandon their spread-out positions and rally at Craft. But Creed did not have that authority, nor the long personal relationships with allied forces that could compel it to happen. It is, frankly, a miracle he was able to so effectively enlist the genius Magos clan and give him enough support to complete his null array, and keep such good relations with the Knights of House Raven and Astartes remnants under Lieutenant Ashar of the Raven Guard. Creed's talents lay in charisma, inspirational leadership, and tactical cunning, of which there are countless examples. Where he fell short was in the administrative realm, where generals of crusade rank must be well versed in logistics and planning, and the diplomatic realm, where he would significantly improve with practice. Though let us not get ahead of ourselves. As for now, the situation was this. By the end of the first day, Chaos forces had killed millions in the bombardment, reduced the continent's defences, and besieged every major force in the Craft district. An armoured column of traitor rhinos and baneblades had broken through the eastern outer curtain wall and rushed into Craft Plain. There were traitors on the northern outer curtain wall, and the vaunted aerial forces based at Kazakraf had been badly mauled due to an inadvisable mass deployment. Volskani battered at the Delvian Cleave. And worse was yet to come. Craft Station, she said, pressing the broadcast button and leaning into the goosenecked pickup mic. Craft Station, this is Major Marta Helska, Acting Commander of the 24th Interior Guard. I am transmitting from the high-gain Vox Station at Rosvar Mountain Strongpoint, Beta 7-9, the Delvian Cleave. She released the button and watched the burning red light next to it cut out. Static fuzz answered. Not loud, but a hiss like the sizzle of Grox bacon. It was almost the only light in the room, that burning red eye. She found it comforting. Without it, the Vox room, high in the north wall and buried in rockcrete, was completely dark. Just her and the static. Helska checked the glowing hands of her chrono, reading just past 0600. If it was accurate, that was. A deep crack bisected the crystal dome. She ached all over. Her cranium throbbed from the discharge of so many missile launchers at close proximity. Scabby blood marked her lip from where she'd thrown herself flat to avoid a fan of heavy bolter fire and mashed her face onto the rockcrete. Her first attempt to broadcast had failed, not due to equipment, but because she hadn't hydrated in 7 hours and her voice refused to work. She was still getting used to speaking around the missing teeth. Helska took a swallow from the numbing water of the canteen, still half-frozen from hours of fighting in the wind shear of the Cleave. It could not be far above freezing in the Vox bunker, but it felt sweltering to her. She pulled a blanket scarf away from her throat, decided she'd waited long enough. She set her fingers on the broadcast button, bringing back the strangely comforting light of the burning red eye. Craft Station, I don't know if you're receiving. I'm broadcasting in the blind. Repeat, this is Major Helska of the 24th at the Delvian Cleave, transmitting in the blind. If you can hear me, I can't hear you. I am making a daily report as per orders. She took a breath, centered her thoughts. We were hit hard at midnight, armored infantry. Our observers up the mountain saw them marshalling, so we had time to prepare. They have chimeras, a few Lehman Russ patterns, all with markings of the 161st Mechanized Shock. Another breath. 3 waves in all. 2 armor, 1 infantry. Armored units were mostly mechanized infantry. We repulsed them, but most importantly, the roadway is now choked with wrecks, making further armored assaults untenable. Several enemy chimeras had functioning heavy bolters and multi-laser turrets. We've stripped those and repurposed them. Any relatively intact vehicles we've repositioned with an old Trojan support tank we found, and sandbagged around them to make them part of our defensive lines. Ironic, really. Volskani took them from the 161st and turned them on us, then we captured them and turned them back on the Volskani. She caught the digression, her report slipping away from professional brevity. This was not a confessional. They broke off the attacks at dawn. Seems they fear our Citadel artillery pieces and are keeping out of sight during the day. We're using the time to repair and refit. I'm formally requesting a resupply of lasgun cells, heavy bolter ammunition, but more than anything, winter uniforms. We're taking cold casualties. Our observers think there might be snow in the next few days. She crinkled a page of notebook paper, squinting at it in the red light. She couldn't see what was written there, just the black of her dark fingers against the white paper. I have troopers and units to mention in dispatches. All of J Company, our cadets, deserve recognition. They engaged the first wave of tanks and destroyed them with hand grenades, despite casualties. Sniper Zadok Plyn had 9 confirmed kills, according to his squad, and was instrumental in repulsing the infantry assault. Oh, and Manvar Pesk, captain of our A Company, engineering section, destroyed a demolisher with the demolition charge and fought on despite being wounded. Wounded was perhaps too light a word. After the first wave, Helska had insisted Pesk go to the infirmary, but he'd refused. Though his body appeared unmarked, his left ear was bleeding from a burst eardrum, and it was clear he had a splitting headache. One eye occasionally floated off-center. She suspected internal damage from the shockwave. But he'd insisted, so she let him. Part of her worried, though, she was allowing Pesk to kill himself in order to make her own job easier. This is Major Helska, she said, acting commander of the 24th Interior, signing off. She let the button go. The red light went off. Helska eased herself onto the cot she'd had brought to the Vox room, moving aside her pack and personal bag to lie down, which was when she noticed the wooden presentation box beneath it and paused. It would have been useful last night. Additional firepower. Perhaps even disabled one of the chimeras before it could fire on the cadets. Slowly, she reached out and unclasped the locking hook, lifting the lid far enough to see the gleam of metal beneath and catch the barest scent of ozone. In her mind's eye, she saw crisped skin coming off a man's hand like a lady's long gloves, then snapped the box lid shut and pushed the box away. When it was securely placed in a fireproof locker, she was finally able to sleep. It was a grim situation report, one of the worst Kell had ever seen. Traitor Titans had broken through the Alpha Curtain wall in the east. House Raven and Cadian engineers were detonating bridges to slow Legio Volcanum's progress. The northern Alpha Curtain wall was still a frecked-up mess, basic foodstuffs depleting at an alarming rate, with 2 ration riots in the Manufactorum districts. Kell flipped the scan-proof cover onto the situation report and nodded to the Kazakin detail that had delivered the folio. Thank you. Dismissed. The sergeant, a man with a bionic jaw on the right side, nodded, hesitated.
Colour Sergeant.
Yes, Trooper.
May I see the Lord Castellan?
The sergeant's violet eyes flicked to the closed double doors behind Kell. Why? The Kazakin shifted.
Fighting on the northern wall. First deployment of elite units in the siege. Heretic Custodes. My company wants in. Hard to walk around guarding paperwork when there's enemy to be killed. Colour Sergeant.
Kell nodded. Your 13th Kazakin, 2nd Battalion, C Company.
Alpha Squad. Fire Team Ziggurat. Yes, Colour Sergeant.
Well, the Lord Castellan is in a strategic planning conclave. No promises, but I'll pass the request and see if we can arrange a rotation.
Thank you, Colour Sergeant,
the sergeant said, snapping an open-handed salute.
Cadia stands.
Cadia stands, a ziggurat with it. The guard detail left, smiles tugging at their mouths. Kell waited for them to go.
Cadia stands,
he mused, using his biometric key to open the double doors and slipping through before anyone could steal a glance inside. Azarka Creed, Lord Castellan of Cadia and Supreme Commander of the Defense Forces, lay snoring on the camp bed behind his desk. Kell shut the door, easing the handle to avoid the noise of the bolt. Creed slept little and woke easily. Part of the hard-living approach he'd had ever since they were cadets together, and only exacerbated from a lifetime in combat zones. Even as a cadet, in what passed for childhood on Cadia, Creed had been an inveterate insomniac, staying up late reading strategic treatises by torchlight and occasionally raiding the instructors' liquor cabinets. Living like that was hard on a body, even one filled with such indomitable spirit. For years, a parade of medicaes had told Creed to get more sleep, regular exercise, to stop drinking and keep a better diet. And they didn't know about the regimen of caffeine pills, since the commander, so babyish in some habits, hated even the smell of brewed recaf. He'd been up for 4 days straight when Kell decided to slip him the powder. Crushed sedative, the kind that reacted the least with alcohol. Still, he'd had to be careful of the dosing, given the amount of arcady pride Creed had taken on board. The desk was piled high with maps, star charts, data slates concerning both Cadia and planets in multiple systems. Kell wasn't sure what that was about. The Lord Castellan's diary lay amid it all, open to a page of shaky writing. Kell leaned down and pressed 2 fingers against Creed's wrist, feeling the pulse. He didn't like drugging the commander. Had only done it twice before, but for the good of both Cadia and the Imperium, Creed needed to sleep. Ever since the Academy, Kell had sensed Creed was the planet's hope, that he would live and die for Cadia. Indeed, Kell had no illusions that both of their lives would end defending their home. But by enemy fire, he muttered into his mug of recaf as he took a sip. Not by working yourself to death, you brilliant idiot.
I can hear you, you know.
What I get for talking? Creed shook his head, eyes still shut.
The glow globes, they started buzzing a little. I need to get that fixed. How long have I been down?
5 hours?
Oh, damn it. I feel worse than before. Sleeping always reminds me of how fricking tired I am.
Want more time? Creed sighed, shadowed his eyes with a hand.
Why don't you read me that briefing sheet? Tell me how frecked we are. Then I'll get up and wash out my mouth. It's damned dry.
The Yamasek. You need to cut back. We don't want it to get as bad as that time at Tyrock.
No, Creed snorted. No, we don't. How bad is it?
Eastern Line has fallen.
Expected, but unwelcome.
Supplies and craft low. Ration riots. Wolves are attacking Crom Gat at the edge of Elysian. Sons of the Lion and Sororitas still holding. Northern Wall contested. Southern under stress.
So we need a miracle.
How big of one?
I don't know, Creed mused. The Emperor and I aren't currently on speaking terms.
Then his brow furrowed. Whether against the headache of the Downers or in thought, Kell was not sure.
The Southern Wall? He asked. Are the frickin' Templars still there?
Penance through slaughter. Absolution by bloodshed. Sublime forgiveness earned with violence.
Strike me! Maudlead roared at the tide of heretics. Strike me!
He wielded the chainsword two-handed, eye lenses streaked with dripping lines of heretic blood. He swept a wide arc, separating two cultist heads, grabbed a mutant by the shoulder and cut its throat, saw a word-bearer advancing upon him with a rune-inscribed blade raised, and stepped inside the traitor's guard to barge him backwards with the shoulder pauldron, before slashing the chain blade up like a pendulum into the heretic's groin. Whirling teeth shrieked on armor as he guided it to the joint, boring through the tough undersuit between groin guard and cuisse.
Come on!
He roared. The word-bearer brought the inscribed sword down, and it glanced off his helmet, jarring his neck with a spike of mortifying pain that salved his conscience. Then the heretic fell, his leg severed, and Maudlead reversed the chain blade to bury it point down in the fallen traitor's breastplate, splitting the vellum tome chained to the traitor Space Marine's chest, sending the shredded pages flying amidst the fountain of blood. Maudlead looked up the rampart, searching for his master. Marshal Amelrich saw and turned his face away, refusing to see Maudlead's deed. Beside the marshal stood Brother Jeffreth with the dragon-tailed banner, the third to carry it at the martyr's rampart. Devrain had fallen last night to a venom-crawler's autocannon, honourably slain as Maudlead should have been. He had fallen to his knees among the endless tide of bodies, climbing up the ruined bastion, propping the banner so it would not fall, shouting, "Stand! Stand! Dawn!" Maudlead had stepped forward to take it up before it fell, but Amelrich had locked eyes and pointed.
Not you. He has judged you wanting.
Jeffreth had caught the banner instead. At the burning shame of the memory, Maudlead ripped his chainsword free. He drew his bolt pistol and dived once again into the mass of bodies, reaving and firing, burning away his turmoil in a welter of gore. Maudlead did not know how he had failed the Emperor. Had he been vain and proud in his decades of bearing the banner of the Crux's crusade? Had his faith wavered? Perhaps he had become complacent, stopped trying, secure in his triumphs and place at the marshal's side, too used to being a rallying symbol, forgetting his role was to smite the enemy in all his forms, abhor the alien, kill the mutant, burn the... And he knew what would prove his worthiness. The one target that would redeem him. The sorcerer with the books. Kill him, and he would carry the banner again. Slay the witch and gain deliverance from this purgatory. Wash away the stain of his weakness with the sorcerer's blood.
For you, he on the throne,
he sang in ecstatic fury, swinging his chain blade through a rank of grotesque masked chattel.
For you, Dawn!
And Maudlead, bannerless, went to hunt a witch. 2. Excerpted from Creed at Cadia, a strategic reassessment by General Dabitha Ravi. With the areas between the two curtain walls now a combat zone, the Battle of Craft Plain entered a new phase, one that, to a certain extent, favoured Creed's preferred tactics. Now, given room to maneuver units and engage his armoured divisions, Creed launched a series of blistering counterattacks against the heretic breakthrough in the east that threw whole units of traitors back against the ruins of the abandoned Alpha Curtain Wall. The armoured counterpunch destabilized the enemy, particularly its war engines, allowing the infantry to make a fighting retreat in good order. Coupled with heavy Kazakin units arriving to assist in clearing the heretic Astartes from the northern wall, The third day proved the most dynamic since the landings. And if things had turned out differently, this could have been a turning point. If the southern curtain wall had held, avoiding a two-front war. If the aerial defence batteries could have prevented more heretics from landing in good order. If Kraft's citadel had not, on that third day, been hit by the first wave of dive bombing. If the slow, treading approach of Legio Volcanum had not finally put the Kraft plane into the range of their monstrous guns. But it was not only external foes Creed had to contend with. Though low-level heretic attacks had hit Kraft since the start of the conflict, the true extent of the problem was about to become evident. Up in the chapel tower of St. Geneth of the Redoubt, the bell-ringer looked down a magnocular scope at the troops on the western wall. They looked, from above, like a stream trickling down off the wall and into the inner marshalling ground, marching down through the warren of streets. He'd set the keyloader just as the herald of the liberators had taught him. Did not keep the big Vox set on and broadcasting. He had no desire to be caught. Holding the key codebook down with his clubbed fist, he picked up the receiver of the Vox set and toggled it live. Sending. Voice of Wisdom 6, sending. Acknowledge? In the earpiece of the receiver, he heard distorted words. At least he thought they were words. Perhaps it was more like breathing or sighing, a noise that slithered through the of ambient static. Maybe not his master's at all, but the ghost of a signal broadcasting on the same frequency and coming through his crosstalk. This is, Voice of Wisdom 6. There are some troops moving here on the western citadel wall. Looks like repositioning to the north and south defences. A sound in response, like whispering, and the smack of a wet mouth. The bell ringer's insides went cold at the sound, and the skin of his hand tingled where he'd shaken it with the herald. Sweat popped on his forehead. He felt pressure in his sinuses. Then all at once, he knew what the voice was saying. Wow! We want more. He looked down the monoscope on his little tripod, lying on his belly against the cold flagstones of the bell tower, played the scope down across the inner courtyard, found the bomb crater in the thin crosshair of the scope with its range tick marks. You dropped explosives in the marshalling ground yesterday. Inside number 6 Bastion West, it hit nothing. 2 points east is a fuel depot. The line went dead. The Vox's orange active light clicked off without him touching it. An hour later, the flight of dive bombers came, and the fuel depot disappeared, cleansed by a leaping pillar of flame. In the frigid tower, the bell ringer was warmed by the heat. Is that hail? Helska peered out of the viewport meant for the Chimera's driver, across the top of the forward trenches and down into the black of the valley. Snow whipped and whirled in the dark, illuminated by the searchlight she'd finally deigned to use, even though it made the crews vulnerable to sniper fire. They stabbed through the blizzard, crisscrossing from the citadels and whatever lights still worked on the wall of chimeras. Sergeant Reviewer pushed his knit cap back, pulled the microbead out of his ear and listened, quiet, to the sound coming out of the muffled night. Thump, thump, thud, clump, thump, clap, thump, ksh. His brow furrowed. It's not footsteps. Maybe hail, but thankfully not on us. Hail was the only thing that made sense to Helska. It had been cold the last 2 nights. Bad enough the troops in the trenches had to rotate into the walls every few hours to warm up. 6 troopers in D Company had lost toes to frostbite while repulsing the wave attacks of the night before. Another 9 had hypothermia and might be out for several days. Those casualties were nowhere near the worst they'd suffered. Both trench lines had been overrun just before 3 in the morning, and Helska had been forced to become that other person again, what she thought of as the Dark Officer, and dropped mortars short in order to drive the Volskani back. Not everyone killed in the barrage had been a heretic, and she knew there were troopers who blamed her for that. Hells, she blamed the Dark Officer herself. But they'd held it, partially due to the wall of chimera wrecks across the roadway, patched with sandbag heavy weapon emplacements between. The tanks with working heavy bolters faced forward, while others were sideways to employ their lasgun arrays. At each end, wrecks were installed hatch outward as communication tunnels between the forward trenches and the throat of the cleave. It got them through the night, but Helska wasn't sure it would hold again. High-altitude snow had started in the morning and killed the cleave's greatest advantage, seeing the enemy mustering for attack and targeting them with artillery fire. "That's not hail," snorted Leg. "Belay that tone," Reviewer said. He'd grown increasingly irritated with the sardonic corporal. Tempers were fraying all around. "No one asked you." "Oh, don't I know it." Helska cocked her head, listened to the odd noise. "Okay, Lek, I'm asking. If it's not hail, what is it?" Lek was quiet, as if judging whether he was sure enough. "You're all Kazaborn, Southerners. I'm a boy from agri-country. We don't get hail up there, but we do have equines. And that, sirs and mamsels, is the sound of hooves." Helska listened. Thud, thud-a-thud. Clack-slip. Thunker-thunker-thud, thunker. Faster. Thicker. "Hooves?" Reviewer mocked. "What? The hit us with tanks and—" "Shit," said Helska. "Regimental channel, Udza now." "What?" said Reviewer. "Threat report mentioned Rough Riders." The Vox operator keyed a channel and handed over the set. Helska stamped the button hard enough to actually feel it through her numb fingers. "Helska to all units! Helska to units! Prepare for—" A searchlight on the chimera to their right blew out in a cough of sparks, hit by a sniper's hard round. "Cavalry! Cavalry! Flares, 30-second interval! Mortars at number 2 grid line! Throng, damn it! Everyone just fire into range markers 2 to 3! Chest height!" Las beams from the trenches lit the snow pink with their passage. Heavy bolters and heavy stubbers, salvaged from the heretic wrecks, lashed tracer fire into the blast of wind howling through the cleave. Too late. In the first bloom of flares, she saw that her grid coordinates were far too hopeful. The heavy bolters firing too high, the artillery dropping long. The mortar barrage, split between flares and frags, wouldn't stop them. The Volskani had got close in the storm, swaddled in white blankets and lances wound with cotton bandages to blend in with the snow. Probably they'd come unhorsed for stealth, then mounted just out of sight. Their hoofbeats made a weird, hollow sound as they thumped and slid on the frozen, powder-covered ground. Thud, thud-a-thud, clack-slip, thunker-thunker-thud, thunker. Lasbolts drummed into the riders and stopped dead. They were heavy cavalry, with both mount and rider clad in carapace armor. Clawed hooves drummed the broken roadway, 6 to a beast, their gene-enhanced bionically augmented mounts snorting great plumes of steam into the winter air. One rider caught a lasbolt under the arm. The force of it lifted him from the saddle and he slid away, the charging mount behind clattering over him and mashing his chest cavity. A monster equine exploded from a heavy bolter round, its front legs gone so it pitched forward, rolling over its master, and bled out, drumming its half-mechanical hooves in the snow. Mortars detonated in a line, throwing up cones of rockcrete and dirt. But the Volskani's heavy armor meant that few went down, and many of the animals who should have fallen instead continued on with great roses of blood staining their blanket camouflage. Ranks of stim files in the mounts' thick necks hissed as they discharged a last burst of chemical courage. "Fire!" Helska shouted, half into the Vox and half hoping her voice would carry. "Fire! Fire! Fire!" Heedless of the fusillade, the riders leapt the first trench, coming down in a skid and scramble of hooked hooves before they went on, muscles bunching to clear the second. Acadian, standing to get a good shot at the underside of one beast, slammed backwards as a flying hoof stove his face in. Most simply lay on their backs, firing upward. A mount landed hard on the frozen roadway after the first jump, its leg splintering in a compound fracture, and slid, thrashing and whinnying into a foxhole. Panic shooting lit the walls as the beast bit and kicked in the confines of the hole. One rider, unhorsed and riddled with lasfire, staggered forward and buried his lance in a foxhole. The shaped crack grenade on the end of the lance exploded, collapsing the earthen walls to bury the troopers inside. Beside Helska, the Chimera's heavy bolter fired, drumming out shots that pounded her unprotected eardrums, venting gases that felt almost tropical in the frigid metal transport. "Major!" said Lek, gesturing. She jumped backwards, away from the viewport. Lek plugged his grenade launcher barrel into it and fired. Not the pook of a frag grenade, but the shotgun blast of a flechette round. He advanced the drum, fired again. An explosion to their left, a lance-mounted crack grenade. Impacts on the roof of the transport, clatters and thumps, screams. "They're over!" yelled Bravura. He slapped the opening stud of the rear hatch with his elbow, already revving his chainsword and holding his las pistol high to clear the lip of the back hatch as it lowered. Riders on the inner roadway, a sanctum not breached since the first night. They charged through, sabers drawn, cutting down the white shields that served as ammunition runners and water carriers to support the line troopers in the tank walls and heavy weapons positions. Helska saw one, Mezcali, a cadet barely 17, drop a drum of heavy bolter ammunition and grab a rider's reins, trying to drag it down. The rider chopped down at her, scoring her helmet and slicing bloody lines across her arms and knuckles before the mount tossed its head and sent her flying and charged on. The mortars, Helska realized. They're trying for the mortars. "Udza!" Helska stepped out of the Chimera's hatch, firing her las pistol so scarlet darts lashed at the backs of the horsemen. "Tell Weapons Company to down shells and prepare to repel with las carbines! Something big and hard thumped her, sending her reeling, boots skidding on the icy roadway, so she careened out into the open courtyard behind the barricade. A mount's flank, she realized. Another rider had come down off the tanks nearly on top of her and barged her aside in its haste. It rushed into the darkening interior of the cleave and dived into the developing massacre. The dying light of the last sodium flare lit blood-slicked sabers as they rose and fell. Gene-Hand's beasts reared and kicked, shattering rib cages with a sound like a boot stepping in the wet leaves of an autumn trail and breaking the twigs beneath. Troopers fired from the upper loopholes of the cleave honeycomb. Fire teams sallied out the casement doors in knots of 4 and 5, hunched and covering each other as they moved to eliminate threats and retrieve casualties. One trooper, Helska could not see who apart from his gold-tinted goggles and engineer facings, grabbed a white shield by the webbing and backed up, dragging him towards the casement door. The engineer kept his las carbine braced at the shoulder and firing as he did it, the squealing white shield painting a wide stripe of blood across the ice. 20 feet from her, Helska saw a horseman turn towards the pair and dig his heels into his mount, the beast's mane of files hissing so its whole frame shuddered and eyes went wide. He lowered the explosive lance and shook his shoulder to seat it properly, almost leisurely preparing for the charge. "Cadia!" Helska said, not knowing why she did so. "Cadia! Cadia!" Her las pistol seemed to fire on its own, peppering the repositioning heavy rider across his side and head. He reined in, armored head swiveling towards her, harassed by her fire but uninjured. "Get back! Get inside! He's going to try and blow open the casement!" Her uncle's sword leapt from its sheath, power field spitting and hissing, sparking blue as the blowing snowflakes hit it. She realized her mistake. The patrol cap was nondescript enough to avoid the cross-haired gaze of snipers. It did not mark her as an officer. But a power sword was a status symbol impossible to ignore. Stupid. With incredible speed, the mount's clawed feet gripped the roadway and launched it nearly sideways. Within the time it took to fire 2 more shots, it was on her, the ineffectual darts of her pistol sizzling on the heat-treated surface of the mount's carapace helm and skirts. Explosive lance gleaming red in the passage of her shots. Useless. Fricking useless. She should have dodged, rolled, anything but met the charge. But the dark officer had taken over with one mad thought. How would it look if I killed this man? And instead of dodging, she jagged to one side and sliced for the beast's chest. But the lancer was trained. A second before impact, he drove spurs into the beast, swerving it right while leaning far over the other direction to redirect the lance. Her uncle's sword connected with the lance in a pop of yellow sparks, and then she was on the ground, breath gone, sliding backwards along the icy road, her jarred spine numb from the impact and the cold surface. It was still going, embedded lance pushing her along, and for a moment she thought it would slam her into the chimera barricade, breaking her neck. Instead, the beast slowed to a crawl, and as it lowered its head towards her, she saw that below its helm and hanging panels of neck armor, it was some kind of reptile. It snuffled, washing her with steaming, sulphur-vet breath, a long, sticky pink tongue. Its twin tips, punctured with sense organs the size of straws, flopped from the scaled monster's mouth and began to quest for the hot blood of her wound. "Hey, hey, nicht," the rider said. He drove his heels in and whistled, trying to bring the beast back under his control. Then he shouted over his shoulder, "Nicht out! Bradau! Commandesti! Commandesti!" She studied her Volscani phrasebook. That meant officer. He was drawing a las pistol when the beast reached out with a claw and planted it on Helska's chest, pinning her hard enough she couldn't breathe. Two other riders emerged from the snow-blind darkness, congregating around her, eye lenses of their wraparound carapace helmets flat and dead as tarnished coins. One drew a las pistol. She was going to die. On her first command. A failure. Pinned to the ground she was supposed to hold. Las pistol, unable to penetrate. Oxygen starvation made her pistol seem to weigh as much as a field pack. But still, she dragged it up from the roadway. Her uncle's sword had dropped when the lance struck her, but the pistol was still in her hand. And now she was underneath the armored skirts of the animal. She pulled the trigger. Red darts stabbed up through the beast's underside. It reared, screaming, throwing its rider and slapping out with one claw at the thing that had stung it. Helska's las pistol flew away into the darkness, but the weight was off her chest now. She yanked the lance free and rolled, scrambled to her feet with the lance in her hands. A las bolt flew past her left ear. She swung the lance at the two riders still in the saddle. They wheeled away, fearing the grenade at the tip. The wounded beast snarled at her, and she thrust the tip at its open mouth, breaking teeth so it leapt backwards and trampled its fallen rider. He screamed, helm crumpling under its weight. "Come on!" she screamed. "Come on, you traitor bastards!" They lowered their pistols. But instead of the crack of a las weapon, there was a hollow, throaty discharge. The two riders were shredded, armor plates coming apart and misting the whirling snow with gore. Mounts reared, shaking their heads, carapace skirts peppered with iron darts the length of her index finger. Lek stepped up on her left side and racked the grenade launcher again. His second flechette round fired low at the beast's unarmored legs to splinter bone and break them down. "Freckin' thrown, Major," he said. "Are you all right?" "Murder," Sergeant Rivera said, rank disappearing in the tension. "Where are you hit?" "Shoulder," she said, rolling the muscle. "I don't think it's too bad." "Hells, it would have been if you hadn't cut the tip off that lance. Never seen anything like it, sir, if you don't mind me saying so." He held out her power sword, recovered from somewhere on the roadway. Helska looked at him with dead eyes, uncomprehending, until she looked at the end of the lance she held. There was no tip on the lance, nor a grenade, just a clean-sheared cut where her power sword had sliced directly through it. "Never mind," she said, taking the sword and keying its activation stud. "We're wasting time. Rally the reserves to the mortar pits. Make sure they don't spike the weapons." "Yes, Major," Udza said. "Reserve Alpha Beta to mortar position. Repulse heretics, prioritize equipment and Sergeant," she said. "Yes, Major." "When this is over, go to my quarters and get my plasma pistol." 3.
Blood of the frickin' angel, Creed blasphemed. It's all bad news, isn't it?
Kell looked down at the briefing slate, tapped the scroll stud once, twice. Yes, General, a bleak assessment. Creed leaned over the theatre map on his private desk, looking at the heavy milkstone tokens marked with the insignia of each unit. The whole sector laid out like a game.
We're losing, Kell. Full retreat to Kraft's Citadel. Spilling a lot of enemy blood in doing it, true, but Abaddon doesn't care how many bodies he leaves here. Attrition tactics only get us so far.
The Adeptus Astartes and Sororitas are still holding.
Who cares?
Creed leaned over the map, picked up a miniature chimera marked with the livery of the 177th Mechanized Shock, reported destroyed, and tossed it aside. It tumbled off the table and dropped on the thick carpet.
The thrawn-damned Astartes and Battle Sisters are attracting attention, but they're all bottled. No damned use. Not at all. The order of our freckin' martyred lady didn't stop the heretic war engines driving down our eastern curtain wall. The damned Templars didn't prevent the southern wall from being breached. Arguably, the wolves are doing their part by mixing it up with the Iron Warriors. But even then, I'd rather have them clearing the northern curtain wall. Who knows what the ever-loving freck the Sons of the Lion are doing up north in their wrecked cruiser? Though I suppose I should be grateful for the amount of fire they're putting into orbit.
Baroness Vardis has engaged the Titans of Legio Volcanum, said Kell, in counterpoint.
And much luck to her.
Creed scratched the lucifer match across the smoking tray, weighing the southeastern part of the map down, and used it to relight a cigar.
She's a woman with a dagger, trying to beat an armoured swordsman. I respect the hell out of the Baroness, but she has her limits.
We need to consider closing the Beta Curtain walls. Protect the muster fields.
I don't need you to tell me that.
If we wait, we risk...
And if we shut them too early, we'll strand thousands of soldiers out there to be torn up by the heretics.
Creed crossed his arms. Kell noticed he chewed his cigar end almost flat. Kell looked down at the slate, scanning it for updates. Gave Creed his privacy. That was, he knew, how he could best be of use right now. Asaka E. Creed did not mind losing soldiers. Indeed, he personally signed as many martyrdom certificates as any commander the Acadian 8th had had in its history. Ordering troopers to rend their flesh on the bayonets of the enemy or crack their bones against a fortification wall had never bothered him. Kell had printed the form letters to next of kin and watched Creed sign them without a hitch in his breath. But this bothered him. Wasting lives. Troopers dead for no obvious benefit, squandered. In Creed's estimation, if a soldier had to die, they should die for the benefit of the Imperium and security of Cadia. Shutting the gates now would not just condemn whole regiments to death, but a bad death. One where they would give up their lives in futility.
"Frack!" he barked. "Fine. Close them."
Right away?
Give them 12 hours. By nightfall tonight, they're shutting.
That might...
What?
Creed's head tilted to one side, his bulldog face even more sour-looking than usual. He took his ragged cigar out of his mouth and ditched it in the ashtray.
That might what, Kell?
Cause a rout, General. If you set a deadline like that, they'll do anything they can to make it there. Abandon positions, break off contact, drop lasguns and run to make it to the Barbican.
We have plenty of lasguns. We need men to fire them. Tell the commissars no punishment if troopers come in missing equipment, and I mean that. Any execution for loss of kit needs to be explained to me, personally. We'll...
Creed wiped a hand across his face.
We'll designate some units to hold the enemy advance. At least they'll feel like the sacrifice is worth it.
Kell nodded. Yes, sir. There's one more thing.
The row was his.
I'm to present this to you. Kell reached behind the stack of picked scrolls and banded manuscript reports on the document caddy and picked up a sword. He held it reverently, 2 fingers and a thumb gripping the pommel, the other hand holding the brass chape at the tip of the scabbard. With a small bow, he presented it to Creed.
What's that? What the freck is this supposed to mean?
From his voice, Kell knew that Creed recognized it. It's the power sword of Sergeant Lucas Baston, General. He fell in combat with a heretic sorcerer on the southern curtain wall. Though the regiment will be keeping his medals, Colonel de Vere asked that his sword be presented to you.
Well, I don't want it. Send the freckin' thing back with my condolences.
Sir, Kell responded. There was an almost undetectable note of chiding to the word. Colonel de Vere said it was in Sergeant Baston's final instructions that it go to you, to do with as you see fit. Perhaps in the regimental chapel or the Museum of Resistance. Creed hesitated, reached for it, pulled his hand back as though the scabbarded blade were radiating forge heat, then grabbed it halfway down the scabbard. Thank you, General. Kell looked up to find Creed standing, listless, the blade limp in his right hand. Creed took 3 steps toward the sideboard with its nearly empty decanter of Amasec, but instead collapsed into one of the leather chairs.
Throne, Kell. Lucas Baston.
Kell knew how he felt. They hadn't been close to Baston. They'd known him, of course. Creed had even dined with him privately when he presented him with the Star of Terror, Baston's second time receiving the Militarum's highest honour, after the Battle of Tyrock Fields. What had impressed Kell was how solid Baston had looked. Eternal, as if bullets could not touch him. The man from the recruitment posters and propaganda pics made flesh, yet utterly unpretentious, despite that fame. In fact, while Creed revelled in his reputation, Baston's notoriety seemed to irritate him more than anything.
This damned war, Creed said, unsheathing the sword 3 inches to look at its stained blade. It's going to take the best of us, I think.
Kell said nothing.
It's going to be hard for you to work up a propaganda broadcast for tonight, isn't it? We'll have to tell Cadia its favourite son is dead, and I haven't given you much for the opening.
Kell nodded. Each Flower of Cadia broadcast began with upbeat news. An attack repulsed, a Baneblade that reported an unusually high kill count, a trooper going above and beyond. Kell was not above making it up if need be, but the stories were better if they were true.
Give me something good, Kell. Anything. One handhold on this cliff.
Kell took a deep breath, scrolled. The Delvian cleave is holding.
The cleave?
Creed's brow furrowed.
Didn't we estimate a breakout there today?
Well, we've been getting reports from the commander saying it's holding. 0 enemy penetration. Lots of requests for supplies, though.
Ignacio got the fight he wanted, then. At least one of us is putting up a good showing.
No, Kell shook his head. Colonel Barathas was killed in action on Landfall Day. It's that major who was in here, Helska. She's apparently seen them through an armoured assault, 2 wave attacks and... He chuckled. A cavalry charge.
Cavalry?
Creed laughed, shaking his head. He paused.
Tall woman, recalf colouring. Black hair and a bun.
That's her. Kell brought up a personnel file on his slate and turned it so Creed could see the headshot picked. Creed raised his eyebrows.
Isn't she related to someone?
Colonel Helska, the 24th's commander when they got wiped out and were refounded as an interior. Supposedly killed fighting a Carnifex hand-to-hand.
Stupid thing to do. What a good story.
He chewed a thumbnail, looking at the pict.
She doesn't look like a hero.
No, said Kell. Not enough scarring. Creed shrugged.
Give it to the propaganda lads, see what they can make of it. Dress it up if they need to. Buff up her after-action reports and add some facial wounds to the pict. Cadia lost a hero today. Perhaps we can make another one.
Yes, General.
Well then, Creed stood. Let's see what those foul junior tacticians have conjured up on the projection table this morning, shall we?
4. The rungs of the ladder were slick and cold. Chilly enough, Kestral had to wear her flight gloves. The pass wasn't high altitude, exactly, but the mountains still squeezed enough moisture out of passing cloud formations that everything was regularly drenched with light rain, which, combined with the wind funneling through, dropped temperatures fast. Another gale blasted by, tugging at her flight suit and making the watchtower lean on its guy wires. Girders creaked. Her body ached. By her best calculation, she'd trekked upwards of 90 miles in 4 days. She'd moved at night, mostly, avoiding arch-enemy patrols, keeping to high ground where she could keep a watch on traitor movements and get a signal for her Vox. For a day, she'd even carried a rune-inscribed traitor helmet, reasoning that it changed her silhouette enough that she might be able to slip past enemy units if she kept her distance. Bad idea. She ditched it. The thing gave her bad dreams. Reaching the top deck of the watchtower, she drew her las pistol and pushed the hatch upward with the barrel, just in case it was occupied. It wasn't. With a final grunt, she hauled herself onto the platform, paused for her mid-morning gulp of water, then opened her scope pouch to see how badly she was off course. At first, she blinked to clear her eyes, as if confirming she wasn't hallucinating, then dialed back the scope magnification. There were 2 spires on the other side of the ridge, spires that shouldn't be there. Upturned arrowheads of metal, high as 10-story citadel towers, bristling with weapons that lit the air with sizzling fusillades of energy spears and cannon discharge. 8 pointed stars marked their walls alongside sigils that made her throat tighten. 2 false pylons, just outside the field of real ones. And before them, in the blocky maze of trenchworks, were the flash stabs of bolters as humanoid figures traded fire. Some were silver and black, the others blue-grey. Kestral sighted a tracked vehicle rolling over the trench lines, throwing red las cannon beams into the earth. Bracing her elbows on the watchtower's parapet to avoid shaking, she dialed in on it with the scope. Full magnification, image-enhanced charge to maximum. For a brief moment, before it slid away, she saw the rivet-studded image of a snarling wolf on the side. The Iron Wolves. Her dead reckoning had been on target after all. Though engaged in furious combat, the Wolves were the closest allied force, and with the resources of the Astartes, they, unlike a frontline militarum unit, would have air transport, able to get her picked spools back to Kraf. She opened her pack, carefully extracting the high-gain portable Vox, settled the leather pad cups of the headset around her ears, and set the dials to the emergency channel. Consulted the codebook for the daily call and response keywords. Dastov's kin! Dastov's kin! Emergency band, all allied units! Dastov's kin! She waited, hearing the pop and fizz of an open Vox line in a theatre where the atmosphere is being torn apart. After 2 minutes, she repeated the call. A response. Hollow. Partial. Crosstalk from an adjacent channel. Last drop we. 3 points west. Should hit her. Confirm target. It seemed to be calling coordinates, directing artillery or an airstrike. Far away? Hard to tell. She shifted the set's aerial, homed in on the signal. If it was a roving Kazakin squad spotting targets for the Aeronautica or an armoured artillery section, that would be almost as good as the Astartes. Better, since they wouldn't be engaged in direct combat. Kestral tried to identify the signal direction, searching the dial to find it again. Realized it came from Kraf. After 3 minutes of fiddling, she nailed the correct band. It came through loud and clear. Cadian accent with a slight Kraf lilt. Weird channel, non-standard. Good hit. Confirm massive casualties. Next 3 salvos, walk it back to the armoured pool. It... Unidentified signal, she said. Dastov's kin, requesting aid. Can you identify your unit and position? I would like to move to you. Silence. Some kind of distortion on the band, words twisted and scratching but unintelligible. Squelched to the point that they seemed inhuman. Unidentified signal, she repeated. Can you give me the daily code, your unit and position? Pilot down and seeking aid. Carrying vital intel. She waited. 3 minutes. 4. Nothing. It was 40 minutes later, when she climbed down the tower and started back up the footpath towards the wolves, that the Vox bleeped again. The unfamiliar channel. We hear you, Dastov's kin. We answer Nestor's sword. Kazakin long-range team Delta Niner. Our signal triangulation has you in the Elysian Ridge. Come to point Epsilon Graci, the railhead. We'll be waiting to bring you home. Kestrel knelt, stretching the map over her thigh, consulted a codebook to translate the nonsense coordinates into usable ones. The point indicated was across the pass, maybe a day's walk. Praise the Emperor, she breathed. Jan Ravetska handed the handset back to the artillery spotter and closed his codebook. This spotter, there were so many of them, at least 24 spread across the city, was just inside the northern citadel wall in an evacuated tower hab. One of Ravetska's star pupils, in fact. Background in civilian broadcasting. She'd managed to call long-range artillery into craft targets with such unerring accuracy. The sector's aerial defences had been spraying the sky in grids, thinking an unseen observation craft was helping call the strikes. One woman, Ravetska reflected, had not only killed thousands of Cadian lapdogs, but persuaded them to waste whole lockers of Hydra ammunition too. You did the right thing calling me, he said, pulling on his gloves. Have I done a service? The spotter asked. He could see the eagerness on her face. Yes, though how big of one remains to be seen. Perhaps it's nothing. Perhaps it will prove the key to our victory. The War Master, she licked her lips. Will he know that I delivered it? Will he know my name when the liberation comes? He will know. Ravetska smiled, enveloping her in his calming essence. He will know just as I do, Aduga. Thank you, she said, blinking back the tears, believing. In a detached academic way, Ravetska realized he did not recall the woman's true name. The woman reminded him of Aduka Ventna, a rhetoric tutor from his youth, so he'd christened her such. It did not matter. He said a name, she wanted it to be her name, and the lie did the rest. I must go, he said. There was a fanatic in Highsgate itching to strike his local Lascell manufactorum, and Ravetska had a body bomb vest earmarked for him. Then there was the other thing, the monumental thing. Keep the faith, Aduga, he said, reaching out to touch the woman's cheek. You will be rewarded. 5. Blood! 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 It coated Acanthos's armor, sticky and sweet, cast dazzling arc patterns in the air as he cut through the Emperor's shrews, crushing in their cuirasses with backhand blows like thunderclaps, piercing their helm domes with his teeth, slashing throats so their wailing hymns gagged on blood. The chapel's defensive force of corpse brides was now dead, the outer gatehouse and the chapel within at his mercy. He gave it none. For within the chapel were not martial sisters, but priests, frail old men who chanted in their white robes, praying for deliverance and to smite him. He'd taken his time about it. Blood pooled ankle-deep in the chapel, cascaded down the stairways to the crypt. Artesia leapt along walls, long-limbed and tinted crimson, drawing her shadow talons across the robed hypocrites, slitting tendons at the back of the knee, opening arteries in the neck, bursting eyeballs. They fell to their knees, screaming. In a last futile act, they prayed to their dead god. Ercanthos tore the arm off one and slashed it through the air in the sketched shape of a cornate rune, spattering a tapestry of St. Catherine with dots of blood in foul patterns. He tore the shaven head off another and mashed it on the altar, befouling an offering plate and filling a golden chalice with gore. Before the altar stood their high priest, thin and bent, his body slumped forward under the weight of his enormous spire-like hat, spewing invective at him. Ercanthos decided to dispatch him with a particular flourish. With one long taloned hand, he grabbed the high priest and dragged him kicking to the altar. Incredibly, the old priest pulled a stub pistol from his robes and fired point blank until the chamber was empty, the slugs flattening on Ercanthos's armored hide. He threw the priest on the altar, smashed his fist through a glass reliquary holding the broken thigh bone of a saint, and stabbed him to death with the sharp end of the sacred femur. Ercanthos could feel the swell of warp energy about him, thick and tacky like coagulating vitae, the presence of empiric entities, the eye of Khorne upon him. "It is coming," he bellowed, caring not as a sister with a heavy bolter spanged shots of his crimson glowing form. "A blessing. I feel the blessing. Khorne, I offer these bloody humans to you." His change, it might finally be his change. Ercanthos could feel the ether pregnant with power. And if not that, perhaps an influx of warp energy into the Lords of Skulls, which had been moving sluggishly into position at 1/4 power. If they came fully online, his transformation and ascendance would be assured. Under the churning surface of the blood, things began to move. Elongated red arms broke the surface, pulling the sister and her heavy bolter down. Conical skulls pushed their way through the blood that dripped from the walls, howling from needle-toothed maws as they were born into reality. The skeletal corpse before him twitched, bloated, distorting. Ercanthos plunged his hands into the broken chest and levered the ribcage beneath open like a cabinet. The bloodletter clawed its way from the chest cavity, slick with arterial red. No bigger than a small child at first, it flopped newborn on the altar and began to grow. A stretched lung covered its head like a caul. The gift given, warp energy drained from the ether, leaving it cold and empty. "Demons!" roared Ercanthos. "Only more warp spawn! Damn you, Khorne! You ungrateful wretch! I defile the sanctuary for you! I have committed myself to murdering these Imperial fanatics for you! And what do you give me?" He gripped one of the growing bloodletter's horns and wrenched its skull off, then heaved it into a corner. "Demons! Ercanthos!" scolded Artesia. He wheeled on the shadow demon. "Why does he mock me? Why does the blood god give me his leavings? You said he wished for sacred blood. We have given him sacred blood for days, yet I am still twisted and half-changed. You have not given him enough. His eye has moved on." Ercanthos snarled, a sound like emergency brakes trying to stop a dropping maglift. "Not enough! Not enough! When will it be enough?" He gripped the Khorne rune on his armor and wrenched it off with a pop of rivets. Then he slammed it to the mosaic floor of the raised altar dais and stamped on it. "I renounce you, Khorne. I renounce your fickle nature, your uncaring eye. You are the least and worst of gods, as useless as the corpse emperor. Tzeentch deigns to bring his followers change. Nurgle is generous with his blessings. Even cursed Slaanesh does more for his devotees. You are filth. You are nothing." He spat a stream of bloody phlegm on the icon. Then he opened his arms in challenge and spoke to the sky, visible through the fractured dome of the chapel ceiling.
Is your eye drawn to me now, little god? Do you like what you see? Why don't you come punish me? Are you unable to do even that?
There was silence. The bloodletters had moved on, sensing human flesh and eager to rend it. Nothing moved in the defiled chapel, apart from the dripping of 100 surfaces drenched in gore. Artesia started to cackle.
Now you mock me too, even as your patron refuses to defend himself. You think on death if you renounce him, if you abuse his icons and spit on them. He is a god, you half-mortal fool. Do what you will to his rune. Jump on it, crush it, piss on it. It is a piece of metal, and at the end of it he will still be a god, and you will be a petty little half-mortal.
She dissolved in laughter again.
I renounce him, and he does not care. What kind of god is that? Renounce what? You think he has your name in a book somewhere? No. You shed blood in his name, and he blesses you. If others shed more blood, he blesses them.
Acanthos threw his arms toward the pools of coagulating gore.
I have made this chapel an abattoir. It is a planetary siege, fool. You kill too slow. Millions are butchered each hour. Massacre rules on this world. And you think this little siege will gain his eye? You told me. I told you to make a dramatic gesture, to spill gouts of blood, to make the Vitae flow like a river, broken its banks. This siege warfare is a trickle, not a flood tide. Gorn does not care about victory or tactical objectives. He wants carnage, and you cannot gain his attention battering your forces against walls. What am I to do, then, if they will not fight me another way?
Artesia said nothing, merely casting herself over a large bloodstain, writhing and splashing with the pleasure of it.
What am I to do? Have patience and use the Lords of Skulls.
The western wall is breached, Genevieve said. The gatehouse chapel is fallen. Within a day, the outer defensive cloister will fall, and the great super-heavy skull machines have... The tower rocked and swayed with a hit. In the priestly quarter, a gout of flame roared skyward, the shockwave ripping out in a gale of rockcrete dust and swirling parchment. With a pang, Genevieve realized it had hit the scriptorium center. Millions of edicts, tactical treatises, and illuminated hymnals atomized. In the distance, the super-heavy machines ground towards the shrine. Genevieve had caught so many blows on her left greave, it had almost been beaten to bare metal. Her tabards, despite their flame-retardant qualities, were brown with scorch marks. A flamoblast had enveloped her, burning away the sacred parchments of her purity seals and melting the wax. One of her seraphim worked to replace them as they spoke. Her sister's armor, by contrast, gleamed with fresh lacquer. "We have lost much," Eleanor answered. "You should have been there on the wall," Genevieve said. "Perhaps it would not have fallen if—" "It would have fallen, and I would have with it. Then the strategic and spiritual health of the most venerated shrine of St. Maurican would be in your hands. And Emperor help us were that to happen. Words, said Genevieve. Words and commands, while I worship with deeds. You have sisters singing in a choir when they could be on the walls. We battle never born here, sister, not some invading army. Faith is the strategic asset we cannot abandon. Without those choirs and Archdeacon Mendazes' continuous liturgies in the chapel of Maurican, you would have been overwhelmed. Just like the two of you, safe behind the wall saying prayers while others... He is martyred, Genevieve. A saint's death. He refused to stop saying the recitations of the Holy Throne, even as the half-prince tore him to pieces. Genevieve gasped. That stubborn... Stop. He raised us, Genevieve. Made us what we are. No, he made us deny what we are. There would have been silence between them, if not for the pounding of cannon fire. Is that why you called me here? To tell me that? It is time to go to the hermitage of the pit. It cannot wait. Now that these so-called Lords of Skulls have our range, we cannot hold out more than a day. No. A spiral of tracer fire whipped from one of the lumbering machines. It drilled into a bell tower in the shrine cloister, decapitating it in a spray of brickwork. It is our only choice. Now that the Archdeacon is martyred, they will not take orders from any but one of us. Rally the damned and unleash them on the heretic's flank. An armoured column will follow. Perhaps we can get enough retributors in range to destroy one or both war engines. You are sending me to die. It is an honour to be martyred in service of the Emperor. It was for Catherine, it was for the Archdeacon, and it will be for you and I when the time comes. Martyrdom is self-sacrifice, and you are sacrificing everyone but yourself. Eleanor coloured. As you so often remind me, your task is to attack. Mine is to defend. So I release you to the attack with my blessing. Eleanor turned back to her siege. That's all, sister? After 35 years of trying to make you care, of wanting to be something to you other than another sister, this is where we leave it. Eleanor sighed. As Archdeacon Mendazes taught us, we are no more to each... No, Genevieve snapped. The old hypocrite is dead, and we don't have to pretend he was correct. We vow to treat all in our order as if they were our sisters, equally. But Mendazes, he always pushed you to treat me less. You knew how it hurt me. You just feared that any sign of affection, any warmth, would soil your throne-damned holiness in his eyes. Language. Language, you say. Let's talk about language, sister. Yes, I said a blasphemy. But words left unsaid can be blasphemy too. If this is the last time, I'm not holding my tongue. All my life you have been ashamed of me, treated me like some dark reflection, a warning of what would happen if you were less than flawless. Used me as a dupe to blame any failure on while taking all the responsibility for yourself. Bathing in the approbation of that old, judgmental... Don't you think it was hard living so close under his eye? Eleanor snapped. Someone had to run the shrine commandery. Not all of us can go reaving through the air. You have no idea the freedom you enjoyed in being allowed to fail. Fail? Genevieve took a step back towards the balcony. Is that it? That is your valediction for me, sister. I am a failure. No, that's not... Eleanor looked away, shook her head. It does not matter. There is nothing I could say that would satisfy you, Genevieve. Genevieve laughed, a sharp snort through her nostrils. It was never your words that I wanted. She leapt off the balcony. As she keyed her jump pack and rose towards the fight, she thought she heard Eleanor call her name. 6. "Careful!" shouted Helska, body tensing as a shower of rockcrete dust and chips scattered down from Cadet Lieutenant Xander's boot. "Angel's blood! The boy's going to kill himself!" Sergeant Revura shrugged, then winced. Last night, a piece of grenade shrapnel had sliced through the shoulder clasp of his flak vest, dropping the armor open and carving a nasty furrow across his shoulder blade. "He wants to prove himself. You remember what being a White Shield was like." Xander clung to the side of the Delvian cleave, 150 feet up. Feet pressed against the side of a bunker position, hands gripping the inside of a firing slit. Edging sideways like a wounded arachnid towards where the big canister hung, its chute snagged on the protruding barrel of a quad autocannon mount. "What do you think is inside?" asked Pesk. The engineer captain looked at her with the one eye that still responded. The other, covered with a bandage, was permanently dilated and rolled aimlessly. Pesk's condition had deteriorated since the first night, when he'd blown the demolisher, and Medicaid Dakaj had privately told Helska he suspected a shockwave injury and progressive brain bleed. Pesk still insisted he could stay on the line. "Our courts, finally," guessed Lek. "Lasgun cells," wished Revura. "Or maybe some food." "Painkillers," said Pesk, nearly wistful. "Do you have a headache?" Helska snapped. "No," said Pesk, sheepish, looking at his boots. "You are to inform me if you get a headache, Manvar." "Yes," he said. "Yes, of course." A shell streaked overhead and detonated in the peaks above the cleave. They flinched as a trickle of rock cascaded down the wall to their left, and Xander gripped the firing slit, waiting for the tremor to subside. He took one more step and grasped the quad gun's barrel for balance, then drew his combat knife and began sawing at the snared chute. "Move away!" shouted Revura. "Stop looking up, morons! You want to get killed by the one damn resupply that hit the target?" When they'd heard the approaching aircraft, they'd taken cover thinking it was an enemy raid. Those came sometimes, but the cleave's wind shear, plus the Hydra and quad batteries, meant that airstrikes were a risky proposition for the archenemy, and bombs rarely fell on target. Of course, neither did resupply packages. They'd spotted 6 exiting the Marauders' bomb bay. 2 had drifted into the peaks, where Plyn and his Alpine snipers were searching for them. Enemy fire had shredded another, and the other 2 had drifted to the Volskani. Then there was this one. "How long do you think—" started Udza, stepping forward. "Watch out!" snapped Ravel, putting out a protective augmatic hand to restrain the Vox operator. The chute tore with a horrifying rip, the package plummeting in a spiral like a shot bird as the holed parachute tried to compensate. It came away so quickly that a cord entangled Xander's arm, dragging him away from the wall. "Thrawn!" squeaked Revura, the big man's voice high in alarm. Livet Xander plunged from the wall, wind shear blustering through the chute, his arms cinched tight in the paracords, and falling with the enormous case towards the hard roadway. "Dakaj!" Helska shouted. "Here!" the Medicaid said, rushing forward. Everyone was running towards the impact point, so much that when the banging crash of the case hitting roadway and breaking open echoed through the Delvian cleave, she couldn't see Xander. "Freck, not Xander," she thought, shoving soldiers aside, telling them to gangway. "Please, not Xander. Not the kid who'd taken on the chimeras for her. Please, God Emperor, not—" They parted, and she saw him covered in blood. "Freck!" shrieked Xander. "Freck! Get it frecking off me!" The cord had coiled his forearm like a serpent, biting so deep the blood ran. His fingers throbbed purple with trapped blood, the limb twisted in all the wrong ways. Helska could see shards of bone piercing skin. Dakaj skidded to a stop beside Xander, using knee pads to go directly from a run to a crouch, a pair of shears in his hand working the blade between flesh and cord, cutting through the entangling wire with meaty snaps. "It hurts!" wailed Xander. "Where?" said the orderly Sivan, frisking the cadet lieutenant, looking for broken bones. "Where does it hurt?" "Everywhere," said Xander. He sobbed. Bloody spittle ran from his mouth. "Fracking everywhere!" Some troopers were stunned, looking at the wounded White Shield officer. Others were scrambling, gathering up the strewn bounty of the case. "Food!" somebody said. "It's food! Thank the throne!" Helska's gaze was rooted to Xander. Dakaj had finally snipped the cord free and was wrapping the wound with compression bandages. "Any other trauma?" he asked Suvan. "No," said the orderly, feeling Xander's ribcage and spine. He snapped the clasp on the officer's helmet and started lifting it free. Then he stopped, shot a look into Dakaj's eyes. The chief medicae caught the glance and leaned back to see the base of Xander's skull where the orderly's red-stained fingers were holding something in. Dakaj bit his upper lip, touching his lower teeth to the edge of his black mustache, then looked at Helska and shook his head. The medicae's violet eyes, set deep within black rings of insomnia, were so hurt she could barely stand it. He drew out a pain-dumbing syringe of obscurine and wedged it into the crook of the cadet lieutenant's wounded arm. Xander's face slackened, his red-wet lips opening in a relieved sigh before sucking breath again. "Major," he said. She came down close. "What did we get, Major? Is it food?" "Tin!" Helska turned and snapped her fingers. In the commotion of scavenging the container, not everyone had seen Xander's state. Reviewer was bellowing at troopers to stop tearing into the cans to show some discipline. "Bring me one of those food tins. Let him have a taste." But when Cadet Sergeant Vivek came close, a tin in her hand, Helska knew something was off. Disappointment and sorrow dragged at the young White Shield's features. A green smear was on her cracked, wind-burned lips. "I'm sorry, Major, it's not... I don't know, it's spoiled." Behind the cadet sergeant, troopers were spitting and hacking. Helska dipped her fingers into the open tin, felt a cold, oily substance. It was thick and dark green on her fingers, and when she brought it to her face and inhaled, she knew instantly what it was. Had a sense memory so strong she recognized it, even through the scentless air of the mountain cold. Those Munitoran bastards! Of all the thrown damned things they could have sent, all the useless, stupid things to lose a man for. "Major?" Xander asked. His voice had an edge of uncertainty to it. "Major? Did I get us something good?" The troopers were turning to her, quieting, confusion and concern on their blistered faces. "Don't show them," the dark officer said. "Don't show them how furious you are. If you do, the next time the enemy hits the cleave, they'll break. They can stand against the archenemy, but if they realize their own have abandoned them, their resolve will crumple. You need to fix this right now." "Major? What flavor is it?" "It's not food," she said. "It's better." He blinked twice. "Better?" "I told High Command about you, Xander. About what you did on the first night. Mentioned in dispatches how you led the assault on the Chimeras. And they heard." "Mentioned me? What flavor?" "It's not food," she said, dipping her fingers into the oil and drawing it out, holding it close so his failing eyes could see. "It's Alpine Woodland Green No. 5. Paint." "Why would they—" She took his drooping chin and held his head up, then smeared the paint across his helmet, over the white stripe, then spooned another handful out of the container and wiped it down his shoulder pad. "You're a shock trooper, son," she said. "A real, throne-damned shock trooper. Congratulations." Xander breathed heavy in shock, hot air misting from his smiling mouth. "You're all frecking shock troopers," she said, standing and raising her voice. "Pass that paint around. Get rid of those ragged-ass stripes on your helmets. You're all promoted. There aren't any frecking White Shields in this regiment. Not anymore." Helska slapped her paint-covered hand on Cadet Sergeant Vivek's shoulder pad, obscuring the white field there. "And you're acting lieutenant of J Company, Vivek." "Yes, Major," She nodded, scooping out a handful of paint and scrubbing it over a helmet stripe. "Pass it around, ye company. Don't be greedy." "And someone vox the scouts," Helski yelled. "I want a situation report on those 2 containers. Whatever's in them, we want it." White Shields whooped, smiled, huddled around tins of paint as they dipped hands in to messily slop over the shameful badges they'd worn for so long. They playfully socked each other's flak vests, saluted each other with green-stained fingers, exchanged oaths of comradeship that billowed out with smoke in the frozen air.
"Good save," said Rivera under his breath. "But I swear, if I find whatever slate-pushing son of a civilian sent us this shipment, I'll twist their head around."
Then the scream of a shell came overhead, joined by another and another, overlapping like the howls of the damned, and Rivera yelled, "Positions!" A quad gun started to drum, and former White Shields scuttled half-bent towards foxholes and emplacements. Helska drew her uncle's plasma pistol, unused to its weight, and keyed the coils active. The vibration set her teeth on edge, and she thanked the throne she hadn't had to fire it yet. "Dakosh," she said, "get Xander in..." But when she turned, the medic and his orderly were already gone, leaving Livet Xander lying, propped against the container. He was already dead. Trazin the Infinite, overlord of Solemnus and archaivist of the prismatic galleries, had a rising suspicion that he was in the wrong place at the wrong time. After stabilizing the null array, he'd occupied himself with a site survey of the regions and environs of Kazakraf, obtaining a general sense of the geography and troop dispositions that had proved invaluable as he subsequently tracked and recorded the progress of the battle. When the Black Legion's vehicle assault had met Creed's armored regiments on the Kraft Plain, he'd been there to observe. As the word-bearers punched through the outer curtain wall in the south, he'd managed to take sufficient notes and image captures for a future display. And while he had been hard-pressed to visit every major event, after all, much of his time had to be spent tracking those battlefronts bordering on the Elysian fields, he'd at least dispatched a stealthy scarab swarm or 2 to collect image and motion captures of regional engagements. Yet now, at the very crux of the battle, he had chosen poorly. Arch-Cryptek Sanet, hidden in orbit with Trazin's personal vessel, the Lord of Antiquity, had just sent him an interstitial message. It told that Black Legion warp constructs had breached the easternmost gate, and a furious combat was in progress just inside the Beta Curtain wall in front of the Joris redoubt. The colonel of that bastion had left the gate open past the deadline, hoping to allow the Mordian Sable Guard and 707th Armored Shock time to make the gate, and had instead triggered the closing procedure too late to keep the Chaos Space Marines out. Now Militarum forces were attempting a major repulse under the personal command of Supreme Commissar Zabine, who had taken command after a series of executions supported by the Nova Marines. Lehman Russ variants were burning out their drivetrains, trying to push the gates closed as Hellbrutes shouldered them open. The most dramatic battle of the campaign so far. And instead, he was here. "Curse the dead gods," he swore, breaking the crypto seal on the orbital image capture scroll and panning through the chrysoprase projection floating before him. "Damn! Damn! Damn! Sanet!" "Yes, Lord." "Your strategic projection algorithm has failed us. I suggest a full recoding." "Why, Lord?" "Why? Why? Dare you ask this after sending me that projection?" Trazin, cautious not to be seen, stepped out of his hyperspace oubliette and gestured with open arms. "They're singing, Sanet!" Trazin stood on the extreme western gate of the inner curtain wall, on the barrel of a disabled wall gun, large as a hab block. Normally, it would be an exposed position, but the illusion emitter hanging around his hooded neck meant that his image refused to register on all but the most psychically attuned humans. He stretched his arms out at the army of cultists that massed below the western gate. An army of cultists that were, undoubtedly, singing. They were down on all fours, as if in supplication, bodies leaning side to side with the ethereal song, so that the multitude kneeling before the closed gates looked like a churning sea. Some stabbed or shot themselves at an unknown queue, joining the mounds of bodies that lay in patches amid the hysteric mob, as wall guns blew great craters in the carpet of flesh. Whole lines died, refusing to stop the odd swaying and burbled keening, even as a heavy bolter calmly walked fire down the line, so each knew for horrible seconds that they were fated to die. Mutated Astartes, their misshapen armor covered with robes, walked among them swinging censers that trailed pale yellow smoke.
"They are doing this," said Trazin, "while at the eastern gate Endurus redoubt a battle for the ages is taking place. Think of what acquisitions I am missing."
"I think you will recall that I predicted the breakthrough would come at the eastern gate," responded Sanad, appending a glyph indicating a respectful tone with an undercurrent of resentment. "All indications were that this would happen. It was your theory that cultist and Black Legion forces hooking in from the southern breach would assault the western gate."
"Sanad,
I recall you observing that the eastern gate attack was a feint, and that Abaddon who despoils is a strategic mastermind."
Abaddon the Despoiler, and yes, that is what I thought. But it's your fault for not taking me out of it. If you'd only made a more convincing case, I would not be stuck here watching whatever this is.
"Yes, Lord."
Trazin fell silent, mulling. If he was honest with himself, a practice he, through long experience, found neither enjoyable nor profitable, placing himself at the western gate had been his decision. Besides, it kept him far from the xenocidal savagery of the Nova Marines, whom Trazin had always found dull and bothersome, and were more likely than any other troops on Cadia to detect him. And so he resigned himself to make do with whatever information his scarab swarms could record, and tried to find a pattern in the swaying. It was at least an interesting ritual to analyze, from a socio-ethnographic standpoint. To what purpose was this? To summon forth a warp entity? To beseech the gods of the false dimension for success in an upcoming assault? Perhaps that was so. He could see Black Legion transports mustering behind the cultist horde.
"What are they singing?" he said.
"You would like a translation note. For what language?"
"Warp chant of some kind. Run it through a filter to identify via diction and grammar."
"Some meaning may be lost due to our inability to read empiric tonality or warp."
"Just the words."
Sanad went quiet, and Trazin was about to ask for a progress scry when the muddy, bubbling speech of the crowd started to resolve into intelligible phrases. Father of laughter, beacon of joy, bearer of the cup of bliss, he who makes life, fertile mother, generous one who gives even the enemy rebirth.
"My apologies, Lord. The filter must be malfunctioning and streaming out trash glyphs. I will—"
"No,"
said Trazin, crouching and enhancing the images in his oculus.
"It's not trash glyphs. It's the 3,300 names of the empiric godhead, Nurgle."
Trazin cast his sensor suite wide, reading for everything: aural anomaly, brainwave patterns, seismic.
"Sanad!"
"I detect it, Lord. A structural disturbance within the wall, if it pleases you."
"Huntmaster, get me down there," he said,
his mag-locked feet pounding on the cannon barrel as he charged back to his hyperspace oubliette.
"Get me behind the walls, 300 cubits back, on solid ground."
As he dived into the pocket dimension, letting the little cylinder of extra-dimensional space slide closed, his aural senses picked up the terrified wail of defenders within the wall.
"Quickly! Quickly!"
When the oubliette slid open again,
He was at a standoff distance behind the massive gates, standing atop one of the autocannon bunkers and other defensive works that dotted either side of the gatehouse road, a network of weapons meant to pour fire if the gates were ever breached. They were not breached. They were not even touched. Instead, they came apart. Rust crawled at the cyclopean hinges, metal pitting, twisting, browning and curling like leaves in a campfire. The open oubliette was a window until he stepped through it to make it a door, and Trazin risked doing so only because it might allow him to focus an ocular scry. What he saw on the blackening, aging hinges were creatures swaying, dancing, singing. He dialed back his chronosense and scryed in closer. They were microscopic Nurgle demons, a voracious, milling colony of them spread atop and within the gate hinges. They capered and sang, mated and excreted, multiplied and died en masse to become colonies for their gleeful descendants. But most of all, they ate, consumed each other with mouths of needle teeth, wiggling loose in decaying gums. They cannibalized the dead and gnawed their own fleshy limbs. And they ate the metal of the hinges, so the thick steel became nothing more than a lattice web of darkened metal, creaking as the weight of the double doors began to pull, twist, and shear the weakened structure. Behind the deteriorating pins, knuckles, and hinge plates, Trazin could see the spreading colony eroding the thick rockcrete of the wall itself. And Trazin, who had lived 65 million years and seen civilizations rise, fall, and turn to dust, knew exactly what this was. The power of eons unleashed. These revolting beings were not eating the machinery. They were aging it. A growling rumble bellowed across the plain towards him, and he normalized his chronosense in time to realize it was a splitting crack. The top two hinges of the left-hand gate had split, and it leaned crazily out of the frame. The troops under it had only a brief time to run before the bottom hinge twisted and sheared, and the slab-like gate, forged from an adamantine steel alloy, came down like a broken tombstone. Thick as a Lehman Russ tank was long, it crumpled armored vehicles and burst a fire support platform in a puff of rockcrete dust. Before the haze settled, the second gate came down, but on that side, the Nurgling colony had infected the door itself, and before separating from the wall structure, it started to groan and bend like a sick man holding his stomach. When it fell, the bent end hammered into the earth like a bare hand trying to dig a grave. The singing had ceased. Only screams now, as thousands of cultists rushed through the open gate, firing stubbers and waving bone charms, many armed with nothing at all. They climbed the fallen gates as though they were ramps, shot disoriented Cadians who were still stumbling from the wreckage, blinded by shock and the drifting clouds of dirt. The Huntmaster stepped to his side, protectively raising his synaptic disintegrator. It was not, Trazin realized, a mere intervention from the so-called gods of the warp. He had just witnessed one of the most successful acts of sabotage in Imperial history. To his left, a company of Baneblades leapt forward, crawling between the tracer fire of the bunkers and aegis lines, heavy bolters chattering and las cannons alight. But even this overwhelming display of armored might, Trazin knew, could not meet the moment. Calculations spooled across the right side of his oculus, his strategic subsystems comparing the forces, terrain, and combat postures of the various units. Sanet's reports of a sudden heat plume over the Black Legion transports idling outside the walls indicated one conclusion.
This is the breakthrough attack. The true breakthrough attack, he said, knowing the words would be lost in the pounding of battle. And amid the most desperate fight of that day, as millions of soldiers grappled in mortal struggle and munitions arced over his head, Trazin raised clenched fists to the sky. I was right, said it. You hear me? I was right. What the hell's is happening out there? Creed said.
The Western Sector officer, Ravi, Kel thought her name was, stammered. I don't know, General. The gates are open.
The gates are what?
Creed slammed his tumbler on the holotable so hard the image briefly flickered out.
What do you mean, open? They were reportedly closed on...
Sorry, General, sorry, Ravi said, motioning for quiet as she pressed a hand to the augmetically implanted Vox hub that had replaced her right ear. Reports say it's... Ravi's eyes wavered, darting across the holotable as if tracking a zigzagging insect before she looked up at Creed. General, I regret to inform you the Western Gate has fallen. Some kind of chemical attack. The passage is open and gates are inoperable. Bane blades of the 113th Death's Head Company have engaged, but they've already depleted half their ammunition. Black Legion transports are preparing to storm.
So even if we retake the gate, we cannot hold it, is what you're saying?
Yes, General.
So we're fracked.
That is an accurate assessment. Creed nodded, puffed his cigar. He cocked his head slightly as he did so, a sign Kel knew meant that he was mulling a difficult call. General, said an officer. When Kel turned, he saw the man wore the blue tabard and high collar of a Navy liaison, the gate symbol of Battlefleet Cadia pinned to his braid. He's thinking, Kel interrupted. Give him a moment. It can't wait, General, he continued, speaking past Kel. We are getting power surge readings from the heretic vessel Terminus Est. It has run out guns and is maneuvering into planetary bombardment position.
Targeting what?
Creed asked. His eyes were distant, their expression unreadable as they reflected the green hollow projection. Our ballistic cogitators indicate the Sword of Defiance.
Bad day for the Dark Angels too, then.
Creed sighed, tore his gaze from the projection map.
Does anyone have good news?
The Eastern Gate is holding. Task Force Joris Redoubt.
Doesn't matter a wet fart if we've lost the Western Gate. We'll have to pull the whole mess back to the Citadel. Anything else? How are the Sons of Rust doing?
The Northern Quadrant officer snapped to attention. Wolflord Highfeld reports their engagement with the Iron Warriors has entered a final phase. He expects to deliver victory in a day, perhaps two.
Well, praise the Emperor for that. And the Templars? Don't tell me they're still at the damn Martyrs' Rampart, yes?
Yes.
The Sisters?
Heretic super-heavy machines moving on them, reported the Eastern Sector officer. We haven't had an update. Baroness Vardas estimates 4 days until Legio Volcanum is in range of the Citadel. Creed blew smoke out his nostrils so it wavered the table's hollow grid, then stepped back from the projector. The tactical officers went to attention.
Well, he said, raising his eyebrows. Didn't like running a damn war from in here anyway. Cal?
Lord Castellan.
Get the Valk's engines spinning. We're setting up a command post on the wall. This is now a Citadel siege, and that's the kind of fight you don't organize inside a bunker. We'll need a Vox operator. You, what's your name?
It's Cormacan, sir, of the 88th.
You know the joke, Cormacan? That until you serve 6 months under me, I won't bother to learn your name?
I've heard it, sir.
Well, it works in reverse too. Now that I've learned your name, you're not allowed to die. Don't make me learn some other damn Voxman's name, Cormacan. You hear me?
Sir.
Now walk with me, Cormacan. I want to see this battle with my own eyes.
Castral entered the rail yard carefully, quietly, crouched beside walls with her las pistol held low. She was going to meet friends, but this was arch-enemy territory. Artillery detonations banged over the horizon, like some massive pile driver stamping the foundation for a new hab.
Wham! 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 Wham!
The sound echoed off the abandoned freight vans and stockhouses of the depot, hammering her in overlapping claps of sound that felt almost like they had weight. Jags of other industrial detonations, Asati's bolter-fire, she assumed, punctuated the air at random intervals. Kestral hurt all over. She'd used a third of the gauze and tape in her medical kit, just binding up her bleeding feet. The canteen at her hip had been empty 2 days, with the water sources she passed too polluted to replenish it. In the mountain pass, she'd licked dew-slicked metal to rejuvenate her dried tongue and cracked lips. Every pilot went through escape and evasion training, but she'd never been physically conditioned to walk this long across difficult terrain with a heavy pack. Worse than the pain was the sodden blanket of apathy that had descended over her, an acceptance that she probably had no control over her life or death. "It's almost over," she told herself. "You made it. Got to the coordinates. Just don't get stupid and sloppy right at the end. This is still heretic country." Castral peered out from the corner of the van, leading with the nose of her las pistol. She was low, sheltering behind the hard cover of its iron wheels, minimizing her silhouette. When she spotted the Kazakin squad kneeling in a circle, watching their quadrants, she sobbed, but was too dehydrated to actually weep. In her long trek, she hadn't met a friendly face. Not alive, anyway. On day 3, she passed a copse of poles hammered into the broken earth. Rebar scavenged from pulverized bunkers mostly, but also flagpoles and the wicked iron stakes often sunk at the bottom of defensive ditches. They varied in length from knee-height to 10 feet. Atop each stood a Cadian head, canted at odd angles, as if the heretics jamming them on had to negotiate around the spines or find weaker parts of the skull base. A few, still helmeted, had the spikes go completely through the cranium and lifted their helmets, the way an officer raises his hat to a passing war widow. Others had runes carved into their cheeks and foreheads that seemed to deepen as she looked at them, as though they were not patterns but holes in the world, holes leading to a dark place that drew her eyes, while her brain recoiled like a scalded child. Those dead, defiled faces were the last companions she'd seen, not counting the civilian woman she'd come across just 2 hours before. The woman had been a shellmaker by her uniform and blackened fingertips, and pressed the head of a 3-year-old boy to her chest. The boy lived, but bloody snot had dried in a crust over his upper lip. She'd unbuckled her respirator so they could see her face and tried to get them to come with her, said that she was 2 hours from help, but the woman only cringed deeper into the corner. Kestral had even set a ration bar in front of the child and showed him the flight wings pinned to her suit, said, Cadia, pilot," and made swooping gestures with her hands. Next she tried, "Creed? My boss." She saluted in pantomime. "It's Lord Castellan Creed." She mimicked smoking a cigar. "You know? Come with me. Creed's troopers will help you. Kazakin, big and tough." The child said only one thing. "There are wild animals. We hear them." And by his mother's stare, Kestrel knew they would not come. The mention of Kazakin had made the woman close her eyes, her lips moving in prayer. There are wild animals. And to them, she was one of the wild animals. Armored beasts that swept into their habclave with their rebreather-masked faces, demolishing buildings with artillery and carving passages through interior walls with melter guns. Hells, an animal wearing her uniform might have bombed their hab. Kestral thought of the mother and child as she unbuckled one side of the rebreather and stepped out of the cover of the van, raising one hand in welcome. They sighted her immediately. They were already crouching in a loose formation against the stockhouse wall, guarding their left flank with a stack of wooden crates. One had a volley gun on a bipod, resting on boxes labelled fodder. "Here!" she hissed. She checked her right and left down the tracks, making sure a sniper or arch-enemy patrol wasn't going to catch her dashing to the waiting rescuers. "Kestral, 89th Combat Picked Recon, tail number 122. The sergeant beckoned her. She jogged to the next van, looked left and right, saw the sergeant's inviting wave, and stopped. She was being stupid, she knew it. She'd spoken to Kraft on the Vox, and they were right where they said they'd be. Kazakin, as promised. Why was she hesitating? They didn't call out to her, so what? Probably keeping a low profile, speaking only by encrypted Vox bead. Kazakin were never exactly friendly, unless... He waved again, not with urgency, but incredible patience. And it hit her. That's the way she'd beckoned to the mother and child. That slow, come here gesture. Coaxing them. Baiting them. There are wild animals. Kestrel's neck hairs prickled against the collar of her flight suit. Is that what she'd been reduced to on her long, solo trek across the war spoil of her home world? Timid prey, cringing in a corner, fearing a world infested with uncaring bringers of violence, regardless of what flag they flew or god they worshipped. No longer able to tell hero from heretic, a rodent foaming with terror as it ran between the feet of two great canines that bit and rent each other, knowing that either could crush her under a clawed foot. No, she was no rodent. She was Acadian. She stepped out, following the beckoning gesture, her boots crunching in the gravel of the trackway, swallowed the rising gorge in her throat as the panic came again. Then the Kazakin with the volley gun turned his helm to look at her, to see what was taking so long. She froze when she saw his left eye. There was nothing remarkable about it, apart from the fact she could see it, because there was a crater blasted through the faceplate of the helm, with its ragged plate and fibre interior edges stained rusty with gore. A dead man's helmet. And once she noticed it, she registered other things, like how the sergeant's shoulder markings were 1st Squad, 8th Company, while the volley gunner was marked as 7th Squad, 4th Company. How their armour didn't quite fit. How the eye lenses were dark without the sheen of live optics. The sergeant raised his las pistol, but he was hesitant and too slow. Kestrel didn't raise her pistol. She dropped her body into a crouch behind the lowered sights and tugged it up onto the fire team. Kicked out 3 shots to keep their heads down and bolted back the way she'd come, blind firing behind her. She broke right to put a van between her and the imposters as the first lines of white clear hellgun beams sizzled past. As she ran, she let out a hysterical bark of laughter as her brain processed what it had just witnessed. How a red dart from her las pistol's hotshot pack had stabbed straight into the join between the volley gunner's breastplate and helmet, pitching him back in an arc of crimson. She just fired her first shots in anger and killed her first enemy. Hannah Kestrel, kite war champion of Salgora slum, was a thrown-damned frecking Cadian soldier. True, she was running from the enemy and had only intended to cover her retreat, but she was fighting. She had a weapon. A defensive weapon, the Valkyrie pilot sneered from the depths of her memory. And that only made her laugh harder, so hard she feared it might choke her breathing and slow her down. She glanced back, seeing the false Kazakin rounding the van. There were 4 of them left, but they were slow and unused to the heavy carapace, the ill-fitted armour sliding around on their frames and making them clumsy. They ripped their helmets off to clear their vision. 2 fired on the run, their hellgun beams sparkling past her. Real Kazakin would have hit her 3 times by now. She was still laughing about that when the shot slammed into her lower back, pitching her face first into the gravel of the tracks, one elbow going numb as it barked against the edge of the nearest freight van. She smelled burning uniform cloth. Hot liquid spilled down her thighs. Spinal shot, probably paralyzed. Kestrel decided not to go down like prey. She sent orders to her legs, not knowing if they'd be followed, and rolled under the belly of the van, hearing shots spang off the wheels. She wormed her way through, her bulky backpack jostling and scraping against the rusted undercarriage. She made it to the other side and stripped the heavy pack off, noting with almost idle detachment the smoking hole bored in her Vox unit. No spinal shot at all. The power cell had burst, showering her legs with battery acid. No calling for help now, if help was ever coming. She ripped the picked spool tube free of the pack and levered herself up into the open van, squirmed back into the shadows in the rear corner. Her hotshot cell was out, but she had a spare in her webbing, plus an igniter. It would take them a moment to find her. She could hold them off with a pistol and with the other hand burn the negatives. What it showed might be vital to the war effort, but the orders were clear. Under no circumstances let the enemy know Cadia's reconnaissance capabilities. Kestrel set the igniter and negative tube on the rough board flooring, fumbled the las cell out of her webbing and tried with shaking hands to slot it into the pistol. With a thump of boots on floorboards, the sergeant was in the freight van door. He'd not bothered to pull himself up, simply leapt. Kestrel snapped the cell into the last pistol, clicked the charge stud, and pulled the trigger. "For the Emperor!" she shouted. Yet the last pistol said nothing. It displayed not a shot counter rune, but the letters ERR. Error. A fricking dead cell. Of all the fricking times. She hit the charge stud and tried again. Nothing. The sergeant stripped off his helmet, letting it fall with a heavy thump on the floorboards. He smiled, but not by choice. Silver piercing rings pinned his mouth corners up below his eyes, exposing upper teeth serrated like a saw. He keyed his looted chainsaw to rev once, twice. On the third, he lunged and ripped it through the corner of a crate, filling the air with wood shavings and the smell of the timber yard. Kestrel scrambled backwards, negative tube in her hand. Outside, she could hear the other two with their strange bark-growl language. And more coming, howling. "You know what we are," said the sergeant. He breathed with a slurping sound, saliva flowing freely down his chin. "Animals," she said. "Liberators," the sergeant retorted. "Here to free you from your officers, commissars, cardinals, and false emperor." She pointed the pistol and fired, knowing it would do no good. His swipe hooked the gun in the body, teeth biting into the casing and throwing it into the ceiling, wrenching it out of her grip and dislocating her left index finger on the trigger guard. "Cadia stands!" Kestrel raised the negative tube to defend herself. If she couldn't destroy it, maybe he would do it for her. "Frickin' swing! I'm tired of looking at you!" And he did. He raised the chainsword so high it sparked off an iron band in the van's roof before he brought it down, and Kestrel, ears full of its howling, raised the precious picked spools to take the hit. The blow came with an explosion of splinters, blood, and screams. Light blinded Kestrel, and for a bare instant she thought she was meeting the Emperor. But it wasn't the light of the Golden Throne. It was the harsh grey sun of Cadia pouring in from the fractured hole where something big had crashed in one side of the freight van and out the other, dragging the sergeant with it. His fallen chainsword lay running on the decking, rattling back and forth. Kestrel dived for it, worrying if she didn't deactivate it, it would cut her. Then she heard the screaming outside and couldn't help but look. Wild animals, she thought. The sergeant flopped, open-mouthed and neck broken in the claws of a beast. 10 feet tall it was, and muscled. Hair sprouted from clawed feet and furred a bestial face. His squadmates backpedaled, raising their hell guns on the creature and blasting shots that died in embers on the feral monster's armor or set spot fires on its hairy arms. Corded muscles, thick as Kestrel's waist, bunched, and the monster threw the sergeant across the rail yard, where he landed with a crunch of bone against the side of an engine. The beast pounced on the closest false Kazakin and sank conical fangs into his shoulder, then threw its head back and ripped the whole arm free, stretching the tendons. When it turned on the last heretic, she saw the power pack of its armor, marked with the red and black saw-toothed designs and rattling with bone charms. Kestrel thanked the throne the beast's body blocked the carnage as it leapt onto the final armored man, worried him against the ground, then lifted him in the air and slammed him with a crunch like a boot breaking an iced-over puddle. Then it turned on her, sniffing, blowing through its blood-slick snout. For an instant she looked into the thing's yellow eyes and had no doubt that the taint of the warp clung to it like the musk of blood and animal saliva it exuded. Dumbly, she looked down at the chainsword still running in her hand. She tried to drop it, but her petrified hand wouldn't respond. The animal came fast, low, lips peeling back from its gore-slicked teeth as it charged for. The boat shell cracked through the air, and at once the beast stood as fully committed to stillness as it had been to action. It looked over its shoulder, growled, and snuffled. Then it was gone, loping on all fours into the twisted ruin of the rail yard. Kestrel keyed off the chainsword and fell to her knees, utterly exhausted. She could barely react when the power-armored warrior crossed into her vision, his bolter trained on the retreating monster. When the bolter swung in her direction, bone charms and fur tails rattling on the warrior's armor, her hands were already raised. "Friend," she croaked.
"Name yourself,"
barked the Astartes through his closed helm. She could barely understand his accent, all yawing vowels and clipped consonants.
"Identify!"
"Captain Hannah Kestral, 89th Combat Picked Recon, tail number 122. She weakly raised the tube. "I have intelligence."
"What happened here?"
he shouted. His plated finger rested on the trigger. Kestral knew, somehow, that it was not an idle challenge. A lifetime of living underneath the boots of soldiers and officers had taught her well when she should see and when she should not. "A monster," she said. "A traitor space marine went berserk, turned on its own."
"That is what you saw?"
"Yes." The angel of the Imperium removed his finger from the trigger and lowered his bolter.
"Then you are very fortunate I arrived, Hannah Kestral. I am Brother Stackle of the Iron Wolves. We have been monitoring your distress calls."
She could only nod. She would never in her life, not to her commander, her confessor, or even herself, admit what she had seen. That the color and markings of the angel's armor were the same as the beast's. 7.
"This is a bright